Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, we are talking about Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. Is this real life? A brand new entry in the Budokai Tenkaichi series is actually here. After all this time, all this waiting, 100 plus characters, it has Dragon Ball Super content, so many story modes, you can create your own battles. There's a lot of content here, a lot to go over. Is it all good? For the most part, I gotta say, yeah, I've really enjoyed my time with Sparking Zero thus far. I do have a few complaints, a few drawbacks, but I think that's more because of where I set my expectations versus what I actually got, which I think long-term is going to serve the game better. So we're going to talk about all of it, but naturally, I had to get my review/impressions out as soon as possible because you know how much Dragon Ball we've talked about on the channel leading up to this moment here. It's time to talk about the newest entry in the Budokai Tenkaichi series, which is something I never thought I'd be saying ever again since, like, what, 2008 with the game that's right here behind me in Budokai Tenkaichi 3. It's been so long. And hey, speaking of Budokai Tenkaichi 3, let's start off with the story mode here for Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, because I see a lot of inspiration taken from many a Dragon Ball game in this entry, but in particular when it comes to the story mode, it's definitely Budokai Tenkaichi 3. Now, my favorite in the Budokai Tenkaichi series is 2 because of the open world and just flying to your missions. That overworld does so much for me. It's also why at first I loved the idea of Ultimate Tenkaichi, because they went back to that well there that I love so much. Whereas Budokai Tenkaichi 3 sits between those two as an entry in the series where you go into the menu and you have all these different sagas with major battles, and it's just kind of a highlight reel. And you get a lot of that here with Sparking Zero. Now, it does cover a lot of ground because it's not just Goku's story. You have Vegeta's story. You have Frieza's story even. You have Goku Black's story. It goes all over the place. And at first, when you start this game, it's gonna feel like Sparking Zero sprints over a lot of the in-between that I think made Budokai Tenkaichi a special series. In particular, I love the second entry in the franchise because it was just so down to the nitty-gritty in covering every single fight. And that just worked for me, especially for the amount of content I got as a kid. I love that. At first, Sparking Zero feels like it's just hitting all of the highlights, though. Like, oh, it's Goku versus Raditz, then it's Goku versus Vegeta, and now you're in the Frieza saga. But as you unlock more sagas, which is one thing I love about this game, it's very unlock-driven. You unlock new characters, new stages, and I've been begging for fighting games to do that. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. But as you progress and you start to see other parts of the story, it feels like the Frieza saga is very short for Goku. But then you go to Vegeta, and you get more fights in the Frieza saga there. And so that's how the story really comes together, and you start to realize they covered way more ground than you initially thought. At least that was my experience with it. Now, my one complaint about the main story is that the cutscenes are very Ultimate Ninja Storm Connections coded. In that, I don't know how else to put it, they're very slideshow heavy. And it's because the game covers a lot of ground, and I understand that. Fortunately, they're not just screenshots of the anime, they're at least things rendered in the game's engine, and so it starts off with like movement on screen, and then the camera starts to drift a little bit as text just paints the bottom of your screen. Most times it's not voiced. I will say this is the most underwhelming part of the game. I would have loved for these to at least have been voiced. I get it's a tall task, but as a celebration of the entirety of Dragon Ball, I think it's something they really should have reached for here. But I also understand that when it comes with the territory of you're reaching into GT, you're reaching into Dragon Ball Z, you're reaching into Dragon Ball Super, it's a lot of ground to cover to fully voice that experience, but I think it would have gone a really long way because for myself and others, I feel like the cutscenes come across as a little bit of shortcutting here. And even big scenes like Goku going Super Saiyan during the Frieza saga, or when Goku gets hit by the special beam cannon, these cutscenes just lack oomph. And I'm not expecting Kakarot level cutscenes here where the presentation is everything in that game, but they definitely feel a little lacking. What they do make it up for is in these kind of what-if stories. So one thing that Raging Blast did that was really cool is they had what-if stories, these kind of alternate timelines, and it's very much a Xenoverse-coded decision here with the story, where you'll have choices that pop up at times. Do you want to work with Piccolo, or do you want to go it alone when you go to fight Raditz? When it comes to the Cell Saga, do you want to go save Piccolo, or wait for Vegeta and Trunks? And these open up alternate timelines with different interactions, different story bits, and these are absolutely, in my opinion, as a lifelong Dragon Ball fan, the best parts of the game. It was really cool to go out there, help Piccolo during the Cell Saga, and in turn, you kill Cell, and then the androids just want to fight you, and you go through each of those fights, and there's a different ending here and how they depart. It adds a lot of meat to the story, but these alternate timelines make it fun where, of course, you know, if you've watched Dragon Ball or played one of the million Dragon Ball games, you kind of know the story. So these little twists and turns add a lot there. But in the terms of ground it covers, really great. In the terms of alternate timelines, really great. I just think the cutscenes feel a little bit lacking, and I wish more of them were voiced. But for how it covers so much, for me, the biggest win here is Dragon Ball Super content. This is something I've really been begging for a while from Dragon Ball games that are not named Xenoverse, is to get Super involved more. I know Z is the star here, but I feel like Super just continues to sit in the background, even though it has really great stories to tell. And I was really happy to see here that they've embraced that they've really leaned into Super content, whether it be, again, playing as like Goku Black or Jiren even. You have these stories that you can experience through their eyes, but also it's the Budokai Tenkaichi spirit of deep cuts. The fact that I can play as Rebound from, I think it's Universe 2, and just to have like Maiden's power and beat up Vegeta, that's awesome, dude. Like, I love that this is here. Bergamo's here. Like, just these deeper cuts for me personally, where I'm like, I want to see these characters more well represented. I know Dragon Ball FighterZ got a few characters from Super, like you had Hit in the game. I know those characters are represented, but now to have like Kaba and Kale and Kefla, just to have all these characters represented in all their transformations is really cool, and it truly captures the Budokai Tenkaichi spirit. And I especially love that they're not all available immediately. One of my favorite things about fighting games back then is you play them, you beat the story, you unlock the characters. In today's fighting games, everything's available at once, and I think it gets boring really quickly. I love that progressing through the stories unlock new arenas, unlock new characters, and I would actually equip them with stuff like ability items and make them more powerful. This is what I loved Budokai Tenkaichi for, and I love that they stayed very true to the original vision of that. Again, it's not perfect. It has all of the flaws from the previous games, but that's the flaws we've come to know and love. One thing, though, that kind of went against my expectations was the combat. I was expecting something very, very simple here. And in a nutshell, compared to something like, say, Tekken 8 earlier this year, yes, Sparking Zero is very simple, but dude, like, there are fights in this game I got absolutely whooped in. It wasn't even close. This game forced me into the training mode, which is something no other Dragon Ball game outside of FighterZ has really had me do. And so I went in there and had to deeply learn the mechanics. What's a Z counter? What's a combo breaker? How do I vanish mid-combo? How do I vanish attack? How do I string together chain hits? How do I Dragon Rush to follow up my combo? And you'll even see in the gameplay, I'm still learning. This is a much steeper learning curve than I expected here. Admittedly, the controls aren't perfect, and even more admittedly, sometimes I got pretty frustrated with the game, but I've come to appreciate that this is a game where I'm really having my cake and eating it too. I love that in the face of a massive character roster that they've still decided to layer on a level of complexity here. There are some fights I span my way out of where I would just rip Gallic Gun over and over, or Final Flash over and over, and you start to recognize that some of these characters that you're playing as in, say, the beginning of the story mode versus, say, Dragon Ball Super characters where they're much more powerful, it feels a lot better when you're playing as the more powered up characters, the ones that you'll typically attach yourself to by the end game of Sparking Zero, or really any entry in the Budokai Tenkaichi series. But you'll find yourself really just stringing together combos. There's a lot more hits, a lot more chain rushes, a lot more vanish attacks, better dodging, better defense. You'll start to feel that with later game characters because they're more fluid feeling is the best way I could put it, versus, say, starting Saiyan Saga Goku. So what you'll have here are things called skill points. It's a little number next to your health bar, and this is a really important thing to manage. It's kind of like, say, your substitution jutsus in the Ultimate Ninja Storm games, where you really need to keep an eye on those and not spam them too quickly. This is what you're going to use to basically combo break. So you need to spend 2 points, that'll combo break, but you want to make sure you don't put yourself at 0. There are certain passive abilities you can activate, better defense, or not getting staggered when you're getting attacked, but it comes at the sacrifice of those same points that allow you to combo break. So if you get caught, you're gonna really get caught. So there's layers, there's a smidge of depth here. Again, I'm not gonna sell it to you like the most complex fighting game, but I've come to really appreciate that in the face of a massive roster, there is a level of depth here, there is a level of mastery here, and you will, unless you're better than me, get whooped in this game at first in the story mode, and that really took me by surprise. Some of the controls, I think, could be done a little better, or I would even say more automatically. For example, if you get knocked away by an enemy and you're close to a wall, you want to use the left analog stick, and that'll kind of help you recover quickly in one direction, versus if you get hit in another direction, you're kind of floating along, R1 is going to be the button you press. And it's just those little bits of nuance that almost feel unneeded, but it might be too early for me to truly say on that, because again, I think there's a level of mastery here where once I learn it, will I be saying the same thing? As you complete story missions, as you complete fights, as you basically do everything in this game, you're going to go over to Zeno, and you're going to be able to just cash in a bunch of missions that you've completed. This game is loaded to the brim with challenges for you to complete. They'll just happen automatically. Pretty much after every main story mission you do, you're going to see a bunch of challenges checked off. After every fight you do, a bunch of challenges checked off. And as you spend time with these fighters, your proficiency is also going to go up, so it encourages you to get closer with them, spend more time with them. And all of these unlocks are going to be things like characters, new outfits, I mentioned stages already, ability items. And just like in Budokai Tenkaichi games of yore, you're going to go into the ability customization mode, and you're going to attach new passive bonuses. You're going to change around their super attacks. There's a lot here again, and I absolutely love it for that. But I also love just how many outfits are packed in here. I look at Sparking Zero, and I have to admit, in the age of modern gaming, this could have very easily been a heavily monetized product. I look at the amount of characters here, the amount of outfits, the amount of unlocks, the amount of stages, just there's a lot here that you are unlocking. It truly is an arcadey, old school fighting game, and I love that they did not fall prey completely, at least at the initial launch of the game, to the whole monetization live service beast, because I think it was very easy to go that route. There are a few other things I wanted to go over with this game. One of them is the custom battles. I thought that this was really interesting because they kind of take a challenge tower approach. I don't think it's as good, but the idea is there are certain fights with modifiers. So for example, you'll have a fight where you can't access your super attacks, so you have to really lean into your combos, and that can be a little bit challenging depending on who you're fighting against. And I thought this is a really cool idea. You're also able to go in and customize your own fights, create your own cutscenes using text, and I think it's a cool idea on paper, but I really haven't had a moment where I'm like, ooh, I want to go and do this. I don't think it's necessarily a negative to the package, but it reminds me a little bit, if I were to draw an absurd connection here, the Fallout 4 settlement mode, where I go, yeah, this is nice, it's here, but it doesn't really feel like it's fully necessary for what type of game I am playing. Maybe you disagree with that. Maybe you think it's really cool. I don't think you're wrong for enjoying it. It's just that, to me, custom battles, I think if they could have gone really crazy with all of the modifiers that they could provide here, I think maybe they would have had something more interesting than just kind of like light customization of fights and stories you can make, plus the custom battles, which had lighter modifiers. So that is there. It is something you can do beyond the main story, because really, beyond the main story, there's that mode, there's basic fighting, there's completing challenges, and there's online fights. So you're really going to be spending the bulk of your time just battling it out in one of these modes and nothing too crazy beyond it. So again, I think the modifiers would have been a better investment of the game's resources. Now, visually speaking, I think that Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is really remarkable. I think the character models in particular look great. Why do they look great? I think it's not just simply the art style that they capture so well. It's the visible destruction on each character. There was one point I was fighting Android 19, and I knocked his hat off, and you could see his little brain, and the way they wear damage in the way that's very true to the anime, true to the manga, I think just really stands out in this game. The visible damage to clothing, like it getting ripped up, shredded over time, it just does a lot. And especially because this doesn't have what I call the EA Sports effect, where as someone who played a lot of the NHL games throughout my high school and college days, like every player in that game looked roughly the same for a long while. And even nowadays with recent NHL games, they don't do a great job, I think, of making the best players actually look unique. Whereas here, it feels like there was no detail spared when it came to each character model. You could have been a side character. It didn't matter. You were treated with equal importance next to someone like Vegeta or Goku. And I love that. So the visuals do a lot here for the characters, but it's also the environments. There's a lot of destructibility here where simply pushing an enemy through a rock lets out like a big booming crash. The VFX work is fantastic. So when you send them through, say, a rock, you'll see like a big puff of smoke and debris everywhere. Attacks have tons of sparks flying off of them. Everything emits a certain type of energy to it. Like, it's just a really pretty game to look at, and that doesn't really get into things like the little details I appreciate. Like, when you're fighting outside the Cell games, it's not just the Cell games arena, but, say, crashed vehicles outside the area of the Cell games that just give it a sense of scale. And I know this is like a really deep cut level of analysis, but like a story to it. It's not just all about the Cell games arena, but what happened around it. It's why I love DBZ Kakarot so much over time, is how it just built out the world around the key iconic locations in Dragon Ball lore. And then you have the super attacks, which just have insane presentation. This is kind of the selling point of the game, because it's a lot like older Budokai Tenkaichi games, where I went through as many of these super attacks as I could, and I just wanted to see them all, just like I did back then. It was like this weird part of my brain came to life from when I was like 10 years old. I went, oh yeah, I loved seeing all these, and I want to do it again. I will say visually, though, lip syncing, that's more of a tech thing, but yeah, a little ew on this, I won't lie. Doesn't look very good, and when you combine that with the already not so great cutscene presentation, it kind of just compounds the problem a bit more. So, in conclusion, what do you have here? You have what I think is a game that reminds you of the Budokai Tenkaichi games in the best, and to some, maybe even the worst ways. Do I think they could have taken things a little bit further with the story mode in the sense of its presentation? Yes. I'm not looking, as I said earlier, for DBZ Kakarot, but I think they could have done more here to have pushed the needle just a touch more to make it where these cutscenes felt a little more alive. It's one thing when you're having, again, these smaller moments captured in a simple way, but even the big moments didn't feel so highlighted here. And I wish that they could have figured something out to elevate the story mode a bit more, especially for how much ground it does cover. But it reminds me of the Budokai Tenkaichi games in the best ways. I love how unlock-focused it is. It's something I've been asking for in fighting games for a while. I love how many characters are on the roster. I love the presentation. I love the focus on just fighting, and how I'm going to be picking this game up with friends constantly over the years, just like I did with Budokai Tenkaichi. And more than anything, and look, this is me not being fully objective here, it's just really cool this game exists. It's so rare to see nowadays, like an old series like that come back in a way, and it does so in such a strong way. And I'll admit, when I saw Spike Chunsoft was doing this, they made Jump Force, man. I was not a major believer. I was excited, but not a big believer there, but I think they've pulled it off. It's not perfect. It's a little rough around the edges, but that's kind of just how I remember Budokai Tenkaichi. There's just a little something there rough around the edges. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, those are my thoughts on Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. I'd love to hear yours down below. Is this game delivering for you? Did you buy into the early access? What did you do with this game? What are you planning to do? Who are you looking to main? Let me know down below. Other than that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I will catch you in the next Retro Rebound. Peace out.